Hi, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Batliner with another read aloud. Today's story is called Enemy Pie by Derek Munson. So here is the cover of our book, Enemy Pie, for my best enemy. Boys and girls, take a look at that pie. Hold your pinky up if that is a pie that you would eat. Oh, I would not eat it. Look, there's worms, there's dirt. If you could think of an enemy that you have, what kind of pie would you make for your enemy? Enemy pie. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks. And I was on the best baseball team in town. Should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. Uh-oh. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Why do you think that Jeremy was such an enemy to him? Yeah, would a friend laugh at you when you struck out? If someone was your friend, would they not invite you to a trampoline party? Yeah, so I think this little boy was feeling left out because Stanley, his best friend, was now starting to hang around with Mr. Jeremy Ross. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy pie, he said, satisfied. Oh, look at that pie. Do you see any worms in there? I don't see any worms. What about any bugs? I don't see any bugs either. You may be wondering what exactly is an enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret, he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I'll tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kind of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he needed those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing all morning. He gave it right back to me. So can you see the worms on the ground and the rocks and the weeds? Ew, can you see the gum? Yuck. I went out to play alone. I shot basketballs until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me. And all the while, I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. So, thumb up if you think enemy pie tastes really good. Yeah, okay. Thumbs down if you think it's disgusting. Yeah, I think this boy, the character, had visions of it being smelling horrible and looking horrible. But the smells that were coming from his kitchen were opposite. They were delicious. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made an enemy pie before. The buzzer rang, and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. Looked like plain old pie. Looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooked, he filled me in on my job. So boys and girls, look at that. What kind of pie does it look like? Yeah, it looks like it looks like, I was going to say a cherry pie, but then when I looked really, really, really close, it looked like I saw the seeds on the outside. So I think it's a strawberry pie. Doesn't it look good? Uh-oh. He doesn't look very happy, does he? Where do you think he's going? My dad, he talked quietly. There's one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Uh, Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. So think about it for a second, boys and girls. Do you think it would be hard to spend a day with an enemy? Put your hand on your head if you think it would be really hard to spend an entire day with your enemy. Yeah, you can't see me, but my hand is on my head. I think it would be super hard. Look, they look like they're kind of confused with each other. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighbor girls, but we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. So look at their faces. Do they look the same as they did in the page before? Like, look at their faces there. And now look at them here. Yeah, they look kind of happy, don't they? It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course I couldn't tell Dad that, since he worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my baseball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Boys and girls, can you have a baseball hoop? I just read that as baseball hoops the first time. He liked his basketball hoop. Look at those girls. Are they being nice? Oh, look, she had her hand on her nose. Touch your elbow if you've ever made water balloons. Yeah, my hand's on my elbow. Water balloons are a lot of fun. Oh, what's that thing? Yeah, that's his boomerang. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it, and it came right back to him. I threw it, and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my tree house. My tree house was my tree house. I was the boss. My sister wanted in. I didn't have to let her in. My dad wanted in. I didn't have to let him in. And if Jeremy wanted in, oh no, boys and girls, what's inside of the tree house? Do you remember? Can we go in? He asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. Okay, I said, but hold on. What do you think the boy had to do? Yeah, he had to take his sign down. I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games till my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Raise your hand if you'd like a treehouse. Yeah, I would too. I think they'd be a lot of fun. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner. My favorite! Was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. Dad, I said, it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood. I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Look at his mac and cheese. Looks kind of different. Dad dished up 3 plates, side by side, with a big piece of pie and a giant scoop of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. Wow, Jeremy said. Look at the pie. My dad never makes pies like this. It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. Put your hand on your chin if you would try to stop your enemy from eating the pie. Yeah, I would too, because he's no longer the enemy. Jeremy, don't eat it. It's a bad pie. Think it has poison or something. Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. If it's so bad, Jeremy asked, then why has your dad already eaten half of it? I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. Good stuff, he mumbled through a mouthful, and that was all he said. I sat there watching them eating enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. Seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, because I just lost my best enemy. The end. So, do you think that the pie really was bad? No, I don't think the pie was bad either. I think what happened is by his dad having him really find out about Jeremy Ross, he ended up not being such a bad guy after all. So I want you to think about that, boys and girls. Think about a time. Have you ever had someone in your class or in your neighborhood that you thought was not a very nice person, but then when you got to know them, they ended up being a very good friend? Yeah, I've had that happen to me. Those are called first impressions. So when you see someone for the very first time and they're making fun of you or they're laughing at you, you don't like them very much. That's the first impression of them. But when you get to know them, maybe they were just nervous or maybe they were afraid that you wouldn't like them. Okay, so first impressions are really important, but it's also super, super, super important that you get to know people before you judge them. All right, I hope you liked our story. I'll see you the next time.